Tom, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. To start right away, Tom, what is NATO Diana in one sentence?
So Diana is NATO's innovation engine, and I'm sure I'll have time to talk about what that means. But we are an engine within NATO to pull innovative technology from the market and
Mhm.
deliver it into the hands of the users that need it. And that's our sole focus and purpose. And yeah, there you go.
That was absolutely one sentence. Thank you. Then Tom, obviously, I want to know, or everyone who listening in wants to know about you. Who are you? How did you come to this position within NATO? Why NATO? Why defense? Please give us a little bit of a background. Who are you?
Sure. Well, first I'll say thanks for having me on. I didn't want to throat clear with the what is the one sentence for Diana, but I do want to say thanks. I think what you're doing with this podcast is fantastic, and we need more in-depth media focused on these issues. So
Appreciate it.
really appreciate your time and the opportunity. So yeah, I'm the general counsel of Diana, and we will talk more about how we work here. But my background, as you may be able to tell from my accent, I'm American, although now I'm based at Diana's headquarters here in London. And I'm coming from the private sector. I spent the beginning of my legal career in private practice at a big law firm doing defense and national security and tech, and then ended up having the opportunity to go work at SpaceX for a couple of years, which
Mhm.
was very interesting. It's a fantastic, very exciting company, and it was an exciting time to be there. It was right after we had started landing the rockets, and so I had the
Mhm.
chance to go down to the launch sites and watch, a giant skyscraper-sized rocket fall
Yeah.
out of the sky and then land. And it's truly incredible. So I did that as counsel, and then I decided where I was in my career. I wanted some room to grow, and so I went back into private practice, and working on a lot of the things that we work on here at Diana in terms of public procurement and export
Mhm.
controls, investment security, and dealing in the defense and the tech sectors. And then I was very happy in practice and happy in Washington when I got a call that was very interesting to go to a defense tech startup doing
Mhm.
software. So I dove into the defense tech world and into the startup world, and it was a really exciting place. And I love the startup culture and the chance to move fast. And so I had been following NATO's work in innovation closely because it was big news, and
Mhm.
it I think continues to be big news, hopefully. And so this job for general counsel of Diana came open on LinkedIn, and I convinced my family it was a good idea to move to London, which is a great city. And so I was fortunate enough to get offered the role, and so now I'm at Diana, which is now just a little over 2 years old as
Mhm.
a NATO agency, and it truly has been a startup experience, an exciting experience trying to actually build a new NATO agency, which is a rare opportunity, and to try to do so with that kind of startup culture, but also be within the larger NATO ecosystem. And as you might imagine, there are two interesting cultures there, and we work to blend those. So yeah,
Yeah.
so that's me.
That is. Thank you so much for this intro. It's a really really exciting story you have there. Um, that is actually you just started with exactly what I want to dive into, the speed and the startup like culture. You're not the first one I hear talk about Diana like this. Can you maybe give us a little bit of insight? How does that work in practice? How does that look? How does an startup approach work in a NATO context where, if we're honest, probably is not known for being the most agile organization or
Yeah, it's a great question. So the key is that Diana, and this gets to my one sentence about Diana being an engine for innovation, is Diana has a very specific mission and mandate. And
Mhm.
so we are able to deliver on that mission. And so, a lot of the the pace at a big institution like NATO comes from a lot of time spent, and I think often spent in important ways, figuring out what policy priorities should be.
Mhm.
And people spend a lot of time at a place like NATO thinking about how to change certain sentences of certain documents to make sure everyone agrees. And look, and that's important. That's part of diplomacy.
Mhm.
What makes us interesting is we're a very small agency that's been given a mandate to act in an agile way to basically collect the inputs that are already there from our stakeholders, from the allies, about what are the technology needs that they're seeing, what are the gaps in capabilities, what are the big problems that they're facing, and then we have a set structure under which we have a lot of freedom to operate to basically take those challenges, put them out to the market, find the innovative companies that can help solve them,
Mhm.
bring them onto contract, work with those companies, and then and we'll talk about this later. We have some very exciting structures to deliver those solutions into the rest of the ecosystem. So it's really
Mhm.
about the nature of our mission and the
Mhm.
fact that NATO has been very thoughtful at a policy level of giving us the flexibility to operate more. And I say this lightly because I think sometimes it's annoying when people say, "Oh, operate more like a business," but really we do have key objectives, and we're judged on our outcomes, and we
Mhm.
certainly adhere to all the basic NATO financial restrictions and HR requirements and things like that. But we can do so in a way that's very fast. And the other thing, and I'll just be honest, sometimes speed in institutions, and I won't just say
Mhm.
public institutions, but in big institutions, is a
Yeah.
function of just not having the expectation on your team that you want to move fast. And so we are really lucky to have built in the past 2 years a dynamic, fast moving,
Mhm.
energetic team that wants to deliver on innovation. And so people have that fire. And so you
Yeah.
can make decisions in a day that maybe other places you take a week. And when you start to aggregate the speed, you can make decisions fast and deliver on them.
Yeah, yeah, that fills my heart with joy, I must say, because I feel like it always comes down to the team, to having the right people, which have the right mindset and the mission and get it and want to go get it rather than just sitting it out. And obviously, like also comes down to the leadership. Yeah, the leadership has to be on board with this and has to lead by taking the risk, taking fast decisions, making it okay to make mistakes. That is something I'm missing massively when I speak with primes, and there's a cultural bit about it, right? And at the same time, we know that innovation doesn't work without risk and failure. So that sounds fantastic.
Yeah,
Can I
yeah.
ask
I'll
a?
tell you actually a story about that because I know we're going to
Oh,
talk about
please.
risk. Is
Yeah.
It's interesting the culture blending that we do here. And so we have staff that have come through from NATO agencies as well as folks like myself who this is kind of their first job in a public
Hmm.
institution. And
Yeah.
it was interesting because we had a workshop early on with a bunch of staff where we were writing our kind of ways of working.
Hmm.
And one of the ways of working was language that said, and I don't quote. Well, you're going to quote me. I'm on a podcast, but I mean, I'm not sure it's exactly what it said, but it said essentially at Diana, we take measured and appropriate risks. And the one staff person totally well meaning, and I'm not picking on this person, and they're a great member of the team, but they said,
Yeah.
whoa, 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 whoa. We cannot say at a NATO agency that we're taking risks. And so it was a great learning moment and a great time for us to discuss what our mission is about. But it also gets to something that really is a core of what I think, and I know we need to talk about this today, is the larger cultural change that needs to happen.
Yeah.
And part of that is everyone needs to be on board, to your point about what it means to take risks, not to be reckless, and the difference between risk and recklessness, but that you need to empower people to take
Hmm.
risks. So it's not about individuals just being brave and telling their boss to shove it. It's about the bosses expecting their people to take risk. And if we don't do that, we're going to be stuck where we are, which is not necessarily a great place to be.
Exactly. It is encouraging the people, but also having their back when things go wrong. So
Yes.
establishing this, the relationship of trust, I think is pretty key because I've seen, I'm sure you've heard of stories like these before as well. In large organizations, they set up a innovation team. They start experimenting. Things go wrong. And the leadership throws the person that made the mistake in front of the bus.
Yeah.
And then it's like, this is gone. This entire initiative is gone if the
I heard
leadership and the trust is not
a
there.
very unfortunate story about someone in a nation. Won't name the nation or anything,
Hmm.
but they worked really hard to convince a contracting official, hey, let's do it this way. And the official was nervous about it, and they convinced them, no, it's okay. This is it. It's going to work. And then it didn't work. And then the auditors got involved, and this person had signed their name, and it became a whole incident because
Hmm.
it wasn't done within the structure. It was just convincing one person to sign their name, and that's not the way we can do this. We all need to come together to give people to empower people to take those
Yeah,
risks, not just convince them to turn their back.
yeah, yeah. What is one thing people get wrong about Diana or NATO or innovation in NATO? Is there a thing which
Yeah, I
comes up
think
every time?
the big thing to understand that people get wrong is that NATO itself buys very little.
Hmm.
So I think people need to understand, and certainly what we're trying to do at Diana is work with all of the allies, all 32 of our stakeholders, together to drive innovation in the defense sector. But I disappoint a lot of people who come to talk to us and think that they can do business with NATO. I mean, and now don't get me
Hmm.
wrong, we have huge agencies that do a lot of procurement
Yeah,
through NATO, but it's on behalf of the allies. And so
yeah.
your customers are almost always going to be the allies, and whether they use NATO or they go it through their national structures, most of the money in defense is spent at the national level.
Hmm.
And so that is part of what we're trying to do at NATO is and certainly at Diana is bring all of those interests together and do collective planning and
Hmm.
innovation, because you don't want 32 nations that we're all allies sort of duplicating efforts. But but I think what a lot of people in the business side get wrong is that unfortunately, even if someone who's a top NATO official loves your product, they're not going to be buying much of it. It's really
Hmm.
about the allies.
Hmm. I think that says a lot about, the mission and maybe strategic vision of Diana. When you say then, at the end, probably your important work is in some cases not more, or maybe I'm wrong here, but not more than a recommendation and support of clarity. But at the end, the purchase decision is being made on a national level. Is that fair to say?
So yes, so it's absolutely the case that it's the national decision makers who will be investing budget in the
Hmm.
outputs from Diana. The
Hmm.
good news, though, is that there are NATO structures in place that are available and are used very, very effectively to do that deconfliction. And so the cool thing
Okay.
is that Diana is plugged into those structures. So let me give you a concrete
Hmm.
example of a way we operate.
Hmm.
We put out those challenges where we're aggregating demand signals from the NATO planning processes as well as the allies. We're bringing those innovative companies in to our program and putting them under contract, and they're working on their solutions. If their solutions get validated through, let's say, our test center network to a
Hmm.
sufficient technology readiness level,
Hmm.
which is basically a 7, which says that it's a prototype, our partner agency, which is called the NATO Support and Procurement Agency, or NSPA, and it's a big agency, it does billions of dollars in business. They're able to, on behalf of allies that are interested, purchase the fruits of that prototype.
Hmm.
So to be clear, it's not just that we have to, tell one of our allies, oh, by the way, there's a cool company here. We do have the
Yeah.
structures in place to help that ally leverage the technology through NATO,
Uh-huh.
but we do need a purchaser, a customer at the ally level, the national level, to be
Mhm.
interested in those capabilities. And obviously, a big part of what we do is try to bring people together so that one ally is not taking risk on a new technology, but it's fitting into the overall collective defense, and more than one ally can kind of pool that risk together to get back to the risk question.
Mhm. Mhm. And obviously, it also helps then to hopefully over time reduce the sheer amount of different systems within NATO, which I'm sure is something you guys keep a close eye on as well.
Yes, absolutely. And there is a lot of work to be done there. And I know I've seen you writing about this and others speaking about this. But of course, there's a tension between economic interests
Hmm.
and defense planning.
Yeah.
Because for good and understandable reasons, nations want their people to have jobs, and they also want the money they're spending on defense not to totally flow out of their own country. And so I will say that the NATO level, so the planning and policy level, is doing a really great job of thinking seriously about how to deconflict so that you don't have 32 different systems purchased. But then there's always a tension there where,
Yeah.
nations still want their own system, or they want to make sure they're getting economic benefit. So, but I will say the exciting thing about Diana is that what we can help do, again, with the allies, is help the allies specialize and think about, especially as we're thinking
Hmm.
about new industries, new markets, where can allies build champions with different capabilities so that everyone sees a benefit, but you don't have lots of inter-NATO competition that really is not going to help us all get where we need to be on defense.
Yeah, yeah. I think that is the exactly right thing to do, and something as you mentioned, I talk about a lot as well. I think the key is specialization and finding a proper balance, because if you don't specialize, then it's not going to be the most efficient way. Let's say it like this. And so a great approach there. I would love to go maybe one step back to the intro where you said Diana is a fairly new agency with 2 years in age. What changed that NATO said we need something new there? We need someone who is the innovation agent engine, as you mentioned. Can you pinpoint this to a couple of things happening? What exactly changed? Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I think that it most of what drove the initial decision making around Diana. And by the way, I as I said, I came into Diana. I was actually the second permanent employee, but I applied after the agency was well on its way to being created. So I didn't take part in its creation.
Yeah.
But I think actually it's a response to a gradual change that became more and more pressing through the 2010s, which was a recognition of how far there had been a divergence between the cutting edge technology that was being developed in NATO countries
Hmm.
by commercial companies, and what was accessible and sort of being sold in the defense market to militaries, right? And this really comes from the fact that what is it now, 75 years ago, post World War II, the engine of innovation was largely driven by public R&D spending, right? And
Yeah.
all of the big tech, and we when we talk about defense and organizations like DARPA in the US, everything from the computer mouse to the microwave oven to the internet and so on and so forth,
Yeah.
it started as a defense program and then kind of filtered out into the civilian market with the emergence of the internet and the app ecosystem and the VC marketplace. There was so much technology that and founders and companies and startups that were able to develop really cutting edge stuff and stuff that's needed for defense, but we're able to do so and not have the defense market as a customer. And so that's where the impetus for Diana first came from. Now, what has changed since the decision, the agreement to create Diana, is that this is only, if you think about a logarithmic chart, the concern was
Yeah.
there and it's building. And then between the invasion of Ukraine and what we have seen in the emergence of the AI revolution and some of the other technology areas that have just flared up again exponentially, right? Like a sudden
Yeah.
a tremendous increase in capability, it's now become very urgent. And so what we've seen even at the NATO summit that just happened in June is that it was a very short summit declaration. Usually those NATO summit declarations are dozens of paragraphs. This was 5 paragraphs, and one of the key points was unleashing innovation. And so this is an exciting time certainly to be at Diana, because even in our 2 years, it's gone from kind of a important, interesting, useful idea to a critical need
Yeah.
for the alliance.
And with what you just mentioned, obviously we have to talk about technology transfer from civil players into defense. And as you already said, and you essentially gave a beautiful introduction that, you know, many decades ago, technology mostly came from the military. But right now we're in a polar opposite situation, right? Where the last, let's say, certainly 3 decades of, Cold War kind of area, all of the, not, obviously not all of them, but the majority of money for R&D as well as great talent was in the civil industries. And so, lots and lots of innovation and progress has happened there, which, and I hope we agree on that, is there, but vastly untouched or unused. Where, I think we could slingshot innovation in the defense industry by utilizing the technology, finding it, utilizing it, adjusting it. Yeah, we will need adjustments, but I think this is something which is not being done systematically enough. And also, quite frankly, there are structures, and, I'm obviously biased, and my main expertise also from my research is around, Germany, or let's say Central Europe. Uh, It's still also a little bit of a cultural burden still there today after more than 3 years of full-scale invasion in Ukraine, where people are hesitant to work with the military, or, and this is such a wide range, obviously, of potential partnerships, use of technology. Um, how do you guys deal with that? And
Yeah.
obviously, as follow on, we will have to talk about dual use as a
Yeah.
classification for products or technologies.
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is that I think the media stories, or the kind of the news, the headline discussions around people not wanting to work with the military just because it's the military, I think are, I don't want to say totally exaggerated, but I think not where the real impact is coming from. I think that sometimes hiding behind concerns around working with the military as such is really a function of investors being skeptical that they're going to get value, that you can do business with the military, right? So I think it comes back to this concerns about procurement. So it's not really that people want to shy away from the military because they don't like defense. I mean, I think there's important messaging and ethical guardrails and lots of other pieces that you need to have that we take seriously at NATO and at Diana. But I think the real driver of this inability for defense to access technology is the way we do business. So I think that would be my first, you know, response to your question. And I think it's really unfortunate because defense customers, once you get them as customers, are fantastic customers. First of all,
Yeah.
when you talk about risk, yes, there's all the risk aversion when it comes to the people who are doing the procurement and the whole processes and too long and too slow. The people who are actually using that equipment, the people who are keeping us safe, they're naturally risk takers, and they're undertaking a dangerous very brave job. And so it's not about them not wanting to have the latest technology, right? And those customers, once you have that contract, governments, knock on wood, NATO governments pay their bills,
Yeah.
and you can trust them, and they're honest, and there are guardrails around corruption and exploitation, and so defense customers, if you're a technology company and you have a groundbreaking technology and you want to refine it and you want a trustworthy customer to get you there, a defense customer that really wants your technology is a great first customer.
Hmm.
The problem is getting them as a customer could
Yeah.
kill your company.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're trying to solve it through
Hmm.
certainly through Diana, and I hope through other efforts to kind of build this, similar models or variations of this, of how do you make there an easier pathway from initial idea to that first customer piece.
Yeah, I think that is the key, the first mile, let's say, of building this partnership. Because one thing I always like to say when, I get lots of people thinking about starting a defense startup reaching out to me, and one thing I always like to mention is, if you manage to get a state as the client, it is so powerful because we also know from massive research being done on it, there's this massive crowding in effect. If you get a contract or any kind of meaningful signed partnership with a country or defense client, you can leverage that massively for raising private capital. I mean, this is the whole field my PhD evolved around. So it is a great tool, but as you so rightfully said, it's so difficult to get there. And this is where I think the danger is, and where a lot of balancing needs to be done. If you are a young company, you have very limited resources and a limited runway. So how do you actually extend the runway so long that you can stand, the waiting times, which are just natural in the system right now? But I think lots of things are being done there, and I'm sure we touch on this in procurement when we talk about procurement in a
Yeah.
second,
Yeah.
to speed things up. But generally, this is why I mention or I recommend to people to run a dual use strategy.
Yes.
So to saying, find civil customers first because they're quicker and they're easier to access when it comes to documentation and procurement and all that stuff. Use this revenue you make to increase your runway to then stand through the long process to get into defense. But if you can manage both, that is the golden ticket there.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I will say what we are working at Diana, and I hope, and um I have hope. Let me put it optimism that we can
Yeah.
get there in a lot of other allies within
Hmm.
NATO, is making it more attractive and possible for defense to be your first customer.
Hmm.
So that is the goal, and there are tremendous benefits for that, including, I was talking to someone who was from quite an established company now, but they were saying that in early days, um, they had the public sector and the private sector business. They had matured to a certain extent, and what was really interesting is that public sector revenue piece was fantastic. It was a really clean, straight line, and it was
Hmm.
the kind of commercial revenue that became very unpredictable. And
Yeah.
so if you can again land that defense customer, then you can actually maintain a revenue stream, but you've got to be careful in a couple ways that we should talk about as well when it comes to dual use.
Yeah. So maybe something I should have asked earlier, but for companies which get engaged with Diana, what kind of support,
Yeah.
what kind of what can you help with actively for these companies? Be it, and who are the companies you would like to work with? Is it just early stage startups? Is it SMEs? Can you maybe give a bit of context
Absolutely.
there?
Yeah. It's a great question. And I love the setup when you talk about the crowding in effect of companies that get those defense contracts, because that's really what we're aiming for the
Mhm.
companies we bring in, is to basically foster that crowding in to keep these companies thriving and developing their solutions. So we put out the challenges. We just put out our challenge. We just finished our challenge call a couple of weeks ago. We put out 10 challenges, and we'll be selecting 150 companies in our next cohort. And we're in the midst of a huge evaluation process to do that. And so, one message I would say, if VCs and investors are listening, is we invest a huge chunk of Diana's resources, time, and budget to really interrogate the applications we get, so that if you get that Diana contract and become a Diana innovator, is sort of the term we use, that's a big deal because you've made it past a huge crowd. So what you get is, number one, you get on a framework contract where you are able to call yourself a Diana innovator and you're able to take part in Diana programming. Then you go to a 6-month accelerator program and get 100,000 euros to develop the solution that you proposed. So you can use those euros fairly flexibly. The requirement is to use them to advance your solution, including to participate in the program. We do that through a network of fantastic accelerator sites that we have all the way from the west coast of the United States to Ankara, Turkey. So truly accelerators across the entire footprint of the alliance. And then we have a test center network that is now over 200 test centers from all across the alliance that they're in agreement with us, and we can use them to help validate the technology coming through the innovators. We do have some funding to give the innovators to do that, as well as to help them advance their solution, but get it in front of people who can say, "Oh, that test really proves you do what you say you do." And then we advance them to what's called the rapid adoption service. And that is kind of the last piece and gets to some of the procurement elements as well, because we don't do procurement at Diana. But what we can do is, where there's interest in the innovators, nations can come together and fund a prototype. And then that gets to the possibility of, from that prototype, additional contracts can be signed by our partner agencies to actually produce the solution. And then there's a bunch of other elements to what we do. I think two of the big ones: one is we participate through the allies and through our innovators in a lot of operational experimentation. So there's a huge exercise that you may be aware of in the Baltics called Task Force X. And we have some innovators participating there, as well as many other experiments and sort of exercises all over NATO, again, to build awareness and connection to the ecosystem. And then the last piece is, we're developing a trusted capital network. We have the mandate to, number one, to introduce the innovators to investors, because we want them to get private funding. So we're not paying for the development just with public money.
Yeah.
And then we also want to bring together like-minded investors who, share NATO values, and the funding is coming from sources that we trust. And then we want to validate those investors and bring them inside the family and make sure that they can be paired up with our innovators to keep the technology developing in a safe way, in a way that benefits all of us. And we do that in partnership with the NATO Innovation Fund, which is a VC fund that was set up by 24 NATO allies to support these efforts.
That sounds like a beautiful package of everything you need, from guidance, acceleration, to adoption and funding as well. Now, obviously, 2 years is not a massive period of time, but are there already some, let's say, prominent success stories?
Yes, there are. And I think, so I will say there are a fantastic array of successes with our cohort, because we are very proud, and you can look at our cohort, and actually we're building some tooling so you can look at it easier. So I'm sure you may be trying to figure out who our cohort is, and you have to dig through LinkedIn, but we're getting there. But so we have a huge array of interesting companies that are doing all kinds of exciting stuff. I think one of the most prominent stories, because it really illustrates the potential and the power of Diana, is an innovator from our first cohort of 44 companies called Lobster Robotics. And they're a very interesting story because they are a robotics company that was started by a few guys in the Netherlands coming out of university, and they had created it's a very cool, cost-effective little platform that can go along coastal areas, and it basically works a little like Google Maps. And I hope I'm not butchering their pitch, so you should go read about Lobster Robotics. But essentially, it works like Google Maps, where you can run these systems in the coastal environment. It takes photographs and is able to, based on location and the high quality photographs it takes, create a explorable map of the whole coastal environment that you can use. They were doing this to look for oysters because it's very hard to find oyster populations in the coastal environment. So it's a perfect dual use
Mhm.
example where this was created to do oyster hunting. Then we put out as one of our first challenges, we need to be able to protect underwater coastal infrastructure. By the way, before there have been a series of incidents, especially in the Baltics, attacking
Mhm.
our cables. We put out that challenge before those incidents occurred. So there was some good thinking on the part of our technologists about needs. But we put that out, and Lobster applied in. They got accepted into the program. They very successful through developing and validating their technology, and they deployed out to the Task Force X, and then now are under contract with the Dutch MOD to
Fantastic.
deliver platforms. So they're a great. It's a perfect example of what our potential is.
Obviously, my most critical question there would be, why are they called lobster robotics and not oyster robotics now?
You know,
But
you know
I
what?
guess I take this
You
on
know
with
what's
them.
funny about that is I will tell you, my wife, when we had our first 44 companies, I was very excited. I said, "Look at our press release. We picked 44." And you know what's funny is she said, "Oh, Lobster Robotics. I like that one." And now Lobster. So maybe there's something to be picking a memorable name for your company. Is I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, obviously. I'll take this on after
Yeah.
our recording to find out what's behind it. Maybe it's one of these genius moves where they do it on purpose, so everyone is like, "Oh, that doesn't make any sense," but now I'm thinking about that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Genius. No, perfect. And you just mentioned using them. You mentioned dual use example. And when we spoke before, obviously we jumped on a little bit on dual use, also
Yeah.
because I just last week had this post on LinkedIn which went absolutely viral yet
Yeah.
again. Where everyone, so I'd love to understand what it means for you guys and what the implications are if a technology or a product is deemed dual use, and are there better ways, let's say?
Yeah. So yeah. So first, I saw your post, and I have to say I largely agree with it, and I guess I should be a little careful in the sense that dual use is in the charter, is in the Diana Charter, and the charter was written only a few years ago, but at a point maybe where dual use was the right message then. So
Mhm.
we do look at dual use, but I think we do so to the point you made earlier, really thinking about it as a strategy, and
Mhm.
it's a shortcut for saying you are a company that is not going to rely entirely on defense revenue. That's one of the key reasons we are a dual use agency, because we are not like some other types of defense innovation or R&D programs where they're looking for IP or ideas only,
Mhm.
right? We're not just
Mhm.
looking for, is this the best sensor? I mean, maybe if it is, talk to us, but
Yeah.
sometimes the best sensor may just be something that the IP is valuable, but it's not its own business. So I think the reason that we think about dual use is because what we're looking for are solutions that have applicability beyond the military and the defense sector, because that means you're going to have a sustaining enterprise where the technology costs won't just be borne by the defense budgets, and where I think you get, in many cases, better products because you have a bigger technology base, user base of developing those products. But to answer your question, I don't think dual use is a great term for this,
Mhm.
even though it is the term in our charter, and it's one that people use, although they get confused about. And I'll say something about that in a minute. But what I think is a much better term, and it's one that I really love that was in the UK Strategic Defense Review that just came out, I
Mhm.
guess maybe 6 weeks ago. Um, it's actually a fantastic document. I don't know if you looked at it in detail, but they've done an interesting job, and there's a lot of these issues in there. And one of the key goals that the UK articulates is to have a whole of society approach, and
Mhm.
that to me is a really nice and positive alternative way of thinking about what we mean when we say dual use. Because what I don't like about the term dual use, and we talked about this, and I think you said it in your post, it creates this almost adversarial or bifurcated view of the world, that there is sort of defense stuff, non-defense stuff, and then stuff that fits in the Venn diagram. And that is
Yeah.
not, it's not a productive way to get back to the reason Diana exists. It's not a productive way to look at the world, because we need, and I think this is what the UK is saying, we need a whole of society approach to keep us safe. There are no longer clear lines between, when you think about
Yeah.
space, the internet, cybersecurity, but even traditional things like the oceans and the land. If you look at what's happening in Ukraine,
Yep.
we need all of our best talent and technology to help us stay safe. It doesn't mean everyone should do everything everywhere all at once, but it does mean that what we're really saying at Diana is we want to find the best solutions wherever they are, and whether they're for oyster hunting or they're developed for counter drone. You may have a counter drone system that's important for security and for defense and for law enforcement, and we want to make sure that technology is available for the defense market. So that's why I like to think of this as whole of society, because it's a little more inclusive.
No, absolutely. And I couldn't agree more with the statement you just chose there because yeah, if one thing, then we don't have time, and so that does mean for me as well, we need everyone engaged, which is exactly what you just said, and so creating these artificial boundaries and walls there does not help us at all. And the reason why I have such beef with dual use is because I did this research, and wrote an entire paper about it, and what we realized is that so much capital is being blocked because of this unclarity. And,
Mm,
I did endless interviews with state organized capital as well as private capital. And now, obviously, we need to be a little bit careful because, that's this academic research. So it was maybe 2 years ago when I did all of the majority of these interviews. And back then, the reason it blocked so much capital is because there was so much uncertainty around it.
yeah.
There was so much uncertainty. There's no clear definition. There's no internationally clearly one definition of dual use. Second, we had this massive issue with ESG regulation
Yeah.
where, people said, oh, well, we can't invest, or we actually are not sure if we can invest. And therefore we choose to be careful. So we'd rather don't invest. So there's lots of things where although obviously no one meant bad, but it was just a risk, an unnecessary risk. And that's why I started with, I don't really care what term we use, for as long as we use a term which brings us away from this, oh, well, wait a minute, dual use is dangerous. That is like the initial reaction I saw from so many people when I'm like, no, hold on a minute.
Well, can
It's
I say
not.
the other thing is, and now I'll put on my lawyer hat.
Yeah.
Dual use, and I think you made this point in your post. Dual use is an export control term, and
Yeah.
I mean, I started really as a trade lawyer, and that's one of my areas of expertise is export controls, and it has a real meaning there in a certain
Yeah.
context. And
Exactly.
and where did it come from? It came from the old world, right? Because the whole export control regime, and we could probably have a whole other
Yes.
segment on that. But all I will say about that right now is the whole export control regime is premised on the idea that everything is starting in a government lab or a lab under government contract, and so it starts at that high level of control, and then some stuff falls through that military grade control into
Hmm.
dual use control, which is a
Yep.
middle between military and pencils and pencil cases, right? And so
Yep.
dual use was this world where technology was flowing out to the market, and it's like, well, it doesn't need to be kept in the government facility. It's not a missile,
Hmm.
but well, we should still protect it at some level, and that's the whole Wassenaar arrangement, and that's dual use. It's not a business term, really. It's not, and I appreciate, okay, you can use it as a strategic term. It's really an export control term, and
Yeah.
that's, I think, what confuses people. And by the way, it doesn't really even work. How we use it doesn't even work because it doesn't totally line up. Because, for example, a lot of technology, let's say AI technology,
Hmm.
AI software, for example, huge military potential, and there's all kinds of questions about that. I'm not, right, and how we do that.
Yeah.
Huge military potential. Most of it is not controlled by any export regime, military or dual use. So even though an AI tool has tremendous military potential, many AI tools and software, the way they're categorized under export control regime, is as not dual use. And so it but if you're an AI company, you may have a dual use strategy of going, defense and non-defense, but that has nothing to do with your export controls. It is a confusing term. Nevertheless, it is in our charter, and so we do say we look for dual use solutions.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a deep, deep rabbit hole we could go
Yeah.
down there, but let's keep it for this. Thank you so much for that framing, and
Yeah.
I think we're on aligned there. But one thing I wanted to go to next is we touched on it before, and obviously when it comes to the rapid adoption part you guys do and how you support with procurement. I still wanted to, use the chance to understand from your perspective, what are the key challenges? And
Yeah.
the status quo is obviously there for a reason, but who does it actually benefit and what needs to change? And do we see the changes happening already?
Yeah. So let me take those a little bit. So I think the first problem we have, and by the way, there's some really great, and there's been a lot of writing recently on this, including, I mentioned to you, there's a guy by the name of Bill Greenwalt,
Hmm.
who helped write a lot of procurement reform in the U.S., who I encourage people to Google him and look up some of his recent writing, because he gets into depth, if you want to do that to yourself. But no, you should go read about it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But the problem is the system that has evolved, and it's pretty similar across the alliance, by the way. I mean, we look carefully at EU versus Canada and the US, and national systems. Certainly there's variation within NATO,
Hmm.
but there's a good deal of alignment, unfortunately, in some not great ways. And one of them is that the system, what I say is that the baseline typical procurement system that is developed, that all of the staff are trained on and they're comfortable using, which is part of the problem, to get back to the risk piece, is
Hmm.
a system that assumes two things. One, it assumes that the defense buyers and the defense planners know exactly what they want to buy.
Yeah.
And number two, it assumes that what they want to buy is very, very unique,
Hmm.
right? Because it's like it's a system that's built on the idea, okay, I'm a defense planner, I need air superiority, so I need fighter jets. Okay, a fighter jet is going to take a long time to develop and build, and you're not going to go onto Amazon.com and buy a fighter jet. And I think that's a good thing. I think, we probably don't want everyone
Yes.
buying fighter jets. The problem is that that's not the world we live in anymore, right? I mean, it is for some things, right? I mean, and that's the job that, and this gets to your point, is there change happening? Yes. One thing that's happening at the planning level at NATO, and Admiral Vandier, who's the current Supreme Allied Commander for Transformation in Norfolk, Virginia, wrote a piece recently on this. They are working at the planning level on separating out the capability needs from the specific tools used to get there. So what we say is they're focused more on getting effects than just
Yeah.
on you need. So I need to, um, I need to get a piece of cargo 300 miles from its current location to its destination. That's the effect I need. that's a better way of thinking about planning, at least for some pieces, than saying, I need a helicopter that can lift this, because then you're really pigeonholing the planning into one kind of capability. So that's going on, and that's good because that gets to the first assumption, which is really wrong for a lot of the new technologies, which is we
Yeah,
don't know exactly what we want to buy, right? We know
exactly.
the effect we need, but we don't know exactly what we want to buy. And what happens in procurement is if we go down the path of using a system that assumes we know what we want to buy, it takes us years and years and years just to write the requirement to go to the market. And that's a huge problem. And that's why at Diana, we use challenge statements. And in fact, this
Yeah.
problem-based procurement approach is something that lots of allies are looking at seriously, and the US as well. And so that's good. And then the second piece is recognizing what's already on the market. And this is what I call the washing machine problem,
Hmm.
which is basically the way the whole procurement system is set up. If you don't have any optionality, I go to a defense buyer in a typical procurement agency, and I say, "Hey, I need to wash a bunch of clothes." If we just use the system as it typically operates, what happens is those people go away. They may even hire expert system engineers to look at this and spend 2 years coming up with a description of a washing machine.
Hmm.
And then what we do is we send that out and we say, okay, time and materials, we need this machine built. And then we get back quotes to spend $20 million to build the washing machine, when all you needed to do was see what's already in the market, and you could buy it on Amazon for 500 bucks. And so we need to be better at articulating our problems, not prescribing the solution. And
Hmm.
then we need to be better at using and buying what's already in the market, and not making the purchasing process so onerous that and so focused on writing lots and lots of responses to proposals that companies that are selling stuff commercially can't sell to defense, and defense can't buy it. So that's the problem.
Yes. Yes. So first of all, wonderful, because challenges, I believe as well, is the way to go. I had quite a couple of months ago by now, a guy called Walter Ballheimer on the podcast, which is a genius when it comes to the design of satellites. And so there this 70 people, probably no more by now, team which design modular satellites. And he described exactly that. It's like, how wild is it that someone in a procurement agency thinks he can define the satellite better than they can, which are these genius engineers who their entire life have not done anything else but designing satellites. So that for me, it still sticks into my mind today when he said this. I'm like, you're right. And rightfully so. Like no one can be a specialist in everything. And also the second thing you just mentioned is I heard another in a similar situation there where a military, I'm not going to say what company, was trying to buy tents, but the documentation to buy tents
Yeah.
for the supplier was like, they were like, what do you guys want
Well,
from us?
I'll
We've
tell you,
we've been selling them in the millions.
you can Google. There's an example, and it's a little outdated now. It's maybe like 8 or 10 years old, but of the U.S. Army looking to buy sidearms.
Hmm.
And I believe so for the sidearms, just commodity handgun weapons.
Yeah.
I think it was a 316-page requirements document. And at the time, and again, well, I may be wrong, so people on the internet, but the I believe it was the chief of the army uh uh basically said, um just give me a credit card and I will go
Hmm.
down to the hunting and game store, and I can buy us the weapons we need with a credit card at a tenth of the cost here. And so they had to rework that. But yeah, it's very unfortunate,
Yeah. Yeah.
to put it
So
lightly.
no, absolutely. What I'm wondering then about is, well, we have understood what are some of the challenges. We also, when it comes to procurement, we have fairly well developed approaches of how to make it better.
Yeah.
Now, the question for me is then, how do we make sure that these, as we now would deem better solutions, make it into use?
Yeah.
Because I think there's a whole bunch of things. Obviously, you need to change regulation, you need to train people, and you also need to change, mindset and make sure from the leadership downwards it is empowered and there are incentives in place and all that stuff. Because also years ago, I spoke to a procurement specialist, and he told me we have ways to do faster, smaller procurements
Yeah.
for also, for like testing of smaller amounts of new technology. But no one does it because no one incentivizes the people to use these tools. So they stick to what they know, which is the long, timely procurement processes. How do we make sure, and maybe you guys are already working on this, that this actually gets used?
Yeah. So I have a few ideas on this. So number one, I think you're right, is we and I'll use the US as a good example. And I brought up Bill Greenwald before, but he makes this point. The US has a tremendous array of tools that it can use to do procurement in faster and alternative ways. And there's some great work being done currently by the Trump administration as well as Congress to do further reforms. And I think, just speaking personally, not on behalf of Diana, I think that that's great. But I don't think that fundamentally there needs to be huge regulatory changes. To your point, that it's not where we need to spend our energy is not on major overhauls. I mean, actually, there probably are great overhauls that should and could be done, but they're not a necessary element to get us closer to where we need to be. Let me put it that way. The problem is a cultural one. And it gets to the conversation that we started with around risk, because we have to do a better job of encouraging in the personnel that are running these processes an expectation that the alternatives will be used. So, and I think there are some concrete ways to do this. For example, if you have certain thresholds or methodologies that prioritize commercial solutions over custom solutions, the way procurement regulations work now, but again, I don't think a lot of this is big regulatory change. This can also just be, this can be done in many cases at the rank and file level. Right now, if you want to use a process outside of the big, long, formal one, you have to justify it. I think we should move towards a system where you have to justify using the more expensive, big, long, formal process. So, in other words, instead of justifying a commercial purchase, you have to justify a non-commercial purchase, right? In other words, you put more work, you literally make there be more paperwork to use the harder process than the easier process. And then you also, do things like looking at real performance metrics when it comes to the tools that are available and how they're being used, and how the performance of individuals is tied to that. And I don't think just in a negative way. I think we should be giving people bonuses and promoting them and so forth when they're showing efficiency. I just don't think it's the case that people are rewarded right now for
Yeah,
being more efficient in many cases. And so let's
yeah.
reward people for doing efficient and innovative things. And then I think the other big piece, there's two other big pieces. One, and I always say this when I'm talking about this topic, is the lawyers are a big problem. And I say that as a lawyer, is lawyers' job is to articulate risk. And too often in big institutions, I won't just say public sector, because I think you mentioned big primes, big companies, lawyers get, I don't want to say the term lazy, but maybe that lawyers get comfortable um, in certain ways of doing things. And I like the paradigm of distinguishing between requirements. I don't know if you've ever talked about this, but there's a good paradigm of you distinguish in an institution between requirements, customs, and preferences.
Mhm,
There
mhm,
are requirements, and a lawyer's job first is to say what is required and not required, And what are the risks if you don't do what's required, right? And certainly, if you're talking about public procurement, you need to do what's required.
Yeah.
But, and I see this sometimes very often in different ways, is that we conflate the customs with the requirements. And so the
Mhm.
lawyers say, well, yeah, you could do it that way, but I'm not comfortable. I'm comfortable saying do it the way it's always been done or it's typically done because I know no one's going to get in trouble. I'm not going to get in trouble. And so instead of articulating to the decision maker the risks of doing it a different way, still under the requirement, but different than the way it's been done, the custom, they basically just say, do it this way, and everyone's good. And that really holds people back. And then that gets to the really big one, which is the political layer, the senior
Mhm.
layer needs to really empower people to take risks. But unfortunately, I got to tell you, and I don't know if you've seen this, it's often the case that they do, that you have senior leaders, senior leaders come in and they're ready to go. And they're like, let's do this. But that doesn't trickle all the way down. And so there's a little bit
Mhm.
of this middle layer. Those are senior people, but they're kind of on the pension track. They're just staying at the
Yeah.
organization for a long time. They're the ones who are not ready to go. And so
Yeah.
you need to target them as well as kind of the rank and file and get them to have those incentives, to accept the risks, if not take the risks, right? But accept that the risks are what the political layer and the leadership layer is looking for.
I can absolutely identify with what you just mentioned when it comes to the middle layer, because oftentimes these are then the specialists underneath, which understand some details and then think it cannot be done any different. So I've had this experience, and when it comes to lawyers, obviously it's not a boo lawyers kind of a session, but I also, from personal experience, oftentimes feel that lawyers struggle with giving clear recommendations with situations which are outside of the norm. And certainly, I think that doesn't help the situation at all, because it's not what they used to do, right? So even for them, it is kind of new to work in a way where you have to look at other risk profiles, and maybe there's no case law behind it because so many people have done it before, or there was some legal decisions on it. So, but yeah, I think at least I would hope that it sounds to me that things are moving into the right direction either way.
Well, we're trying, right? I mean, we need the ally. So I will say that there are positive signs. So there was at the
Mhm.
summit, the allies agreed to something called the Rapid Adoption Action Plan,
Yes.
which has varying all kinds of different ideas, very interesting ideas that are being actioned and that we're certainly helping to support. But I think the important element of that action plan is not even in the detail, but it's in the fact that it exists, right? The core piece there is a very high level political commitment on the part of all the allies to drive towards getting new technologies and non-traditional suppliers, which is the way we articulate startups and new companies
Yeah.
into the supply chain. And look, the bottom line is, and I don't know that I would say this is good news because it's an unfortunate situation we find ourselves in, but it's clear at this point it is critical to get more suppliers, more production, more technology into the market. We're not in that, year 2000 Britney Spears, everyone's at peace, everyone's friends, they're opening McDonald's
Yeah.
in every country in the world. It's just not where we are. And
Yeah.
so and so there just isn't, even within the traditional supply base, there isn't the capacity, even if we have all this new money coming in, we cannot get where we need to be without new suppliers.
Exactly. And the old suppliers, or the now primes, they simply don't have the structures to be innovative and quick. And that is okay, because what I always like to say or make very clear, we need both.
Yeah.
We need both. We need the primes, we need them today, we need them in 10 years because they have the capacity, and we will need legacy tech either way. Yeah. But for what you just asked for, we need more innovation. We need more player overall in the market. We obviously also need the funding for them, and this is actually the next section I would love to go a little bit deeper. You mentioned in the beginning, you also are, building a investor network. You mentioned it, trusted investors with similar values, and you want to ensure that the companies which you guys find and you help them evolve, maturing their technology, that they also have access to finance, which is absolutely critical. And we cannot rely on state finance. We need to use the crowding in effect, vetted by Diana, and then use private capital. And so, the idea is everyone wins. What I'm always very curious about, and also because it keeps coming up on my side so many times, and I'd love to have your insights there. In my mind, if I think about, let's say the three key stakeholders within your stakeholder groups,
Hmm.
I'd say startups, so really early stage kind of organizations. I would see SMEs and currently maybe civil players, talking about technology
Yeah.
transfer, finding and using technology we have. But at the same time, third, I would want to see or talk about the venture capitalists, or, let's just call them investors,
Right.
because I always feel like in every one of these, let's say, three areas, we have misunderstandings and
Yeah.
things people need to be honest and clear about. And, we need to be realistic and get things straight. And from your point of view, from your experience, I would love to hear for every one of these groups, what are the key mistakes or the key things to get right to make this a success for everyone.
Yeah, it is. It's funny because the key word again is risk,
Uh-huh.
and it's about what we say. It's about de-risking, right? And so, and again, this is why my one sentence, Diana's NATO's innovation engine, because what our theory of change, which I think is bearing out so far, and when I think we benefit from a geopolitical context that supports it right now,
Mhm.
is that we can line up the incentives and we can de-risk in the right ways to get everyone on board. So what do I mean? So first, we take real demand signals that we aggregate, and we have a very privileged place to do that. And the other thing I'll say, right, is we are a NATO agency, and so we are not biased by one NATO nation. We're not a government
Mhm.
entity. We have a responsibility to be equitable and to be sort of neutral across all of our stakeholders. And there's one vote for each of the 32 on our board. And so that gives us a really unique position to be honest and
Mhm.
to be thoughtful about what are the real demands, the real needs, aggregate those, share those with the market. So that gets to your question about both, and you asked earlier about we really look at early stage. We talk often in technology readiness levels, which have their strengths and weaknesses, but we look from say TRL 3 or 4 up to 7, 8. That's kind of
Mhm.
our target area. If we have a really awesome commercial company that's never touched defense and they really submit a solution that could be groundbreaking, then we would take them in at kind of a higher stage as well. But that's kind of what we look for. So I don't right now we're not doing a lot of programmatic distinction between the early and later. It's just a matter of time frames. But so for them, they get that demand signal and that gives them a basis on which to develop their technology.
Mhm.
Then we have the de-risking for the customer end, right? And that's what I already talked about, which is we give them opportunity to collaborate in a controlled setting with the innovators to help share the needs, to do the testing and the experimentation that the stuff actually works and is safe. That it's to get a little bit to you asked about, or, the ethical piece that we do. We are driving towards adherence to, for example, the NATO AI ethics guidelines, right? So we de-risk in that way for the stakeholders, and then it's the funding piece. So how do we
Mhm.
de-risk for the investors? And the thing is, what the investors really want de-risk is the market, right? So
Yeah.
when I talk, and I'm sure your conversations when you talk to venture capitalists and investors, they are experts at vetting the the technology, or at least in terms of an investment proposition, and they are okay with taking risk that stuff doesn't work, right? Like
Mhm.
that is built into the model.
Yeah.
What is not built into the model is that stuff works, but because there's slow, laggy lawyers in the procurement system, the stuff works and the customers need it and they want it and the technology works and they've invested, but then it doesn't get bought because then that's a broken market. And so
Yeah.
what we want to de-risk for the investors are the processes of actually delivering the solutions. And that's why we're focused with the rapid adoption service
Mhm.
on demonstrating our ability to convert or transition the Diana solutions into real revenue, right? Into real sales, into adoption. Because if we can show that Diana is a place where the innovators that come into our program are on a real pipeline in a real engine to delivery, then that is a way, that's a de-risking signal for the investors. The other way we want to de-risk for investors is spread the risk. And so that's why we want to build this, and we have a great network that we're formalizing now around the sort of trusted investors. Because what we want are investors to come in together, get access through this network to some of the strategic thinking, so that they can understand where the market's going, and then are able to again not be sticking their neck out, but rather can come in, in rounds in a way that that doesn't break their model.
I find it so interesting that you use risk as the leading factor here, because I think for the vast majority of young companies, that is true, no matter if you are in defense or not. Because I personally, for my own companies, can use risk as the exact same thing. I always like to say to first-time founders or people who are starting to think about it, if you don't get people to buy or commit to get this first project over the line, you haven't shown them that their risk is low enough, or you haven't de-risked the deal structure enough. Because I think, when it comes to new things, everyone always is concerned about is the risk behind it. And it's not that people don't want to try new things, they just don't want to look dumb if it goes wrong, I think.
Yes.
To
Yes.
to a large extent. And that is even true if you have clients where, the leadership says it's okay to take risks and, things can go wrong. But yeah, I love that
Well,
that
and
that
I
version
would
there.
say that the thing that we also are really encouraging, and this gets to a little more of the sophisticated reforms that I think need to be adopted in the alliance when it comes to procurement, is the taking some of the mindsets, and this is, I know you've mentioned companies like Anduril. I think what those sort of new primes, the big defense tech success stories so far, what
Yep.
they're bringing to the table is actually the mindset from the software industry, from the SaaS industry, about the continuous improvement
Yep.
and the continuous delivery of new features. And so, really, another way to de risk is to not make it be a 30-year drone program, right? But in other words, have the buying processes in place so that you can purchase, iterate, and have your suppliers iterate and supply. And it's not this very static, old school view of what you're buying on the time frame you're buying. And that's another way of de-risking. It's also another way, to your point, that in whatever industry you're in, you got to
Yep.
get those early adopter customers. And I've been there looking at PowerPoint decks from companies selling new business platforms. And it's like, well, you get the platform and it does so much, and then they've got stuff on the roadmap, right? And that kind of approach is a way of getting those early customers and keeping them.
Yep.
But it also means that if the technology doesn't work the way you want it to, you're not locked in to a 30-year program and a huge, $1 trillion budget.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think once you have this first step, the beauty, most powerful thing for me is that you get a meaningful conversation ongoing on, what is actually needed. Because just like with any private or commercial product, features in defense will change and the use of the product will change over time. But once you get this first step, I think you have a massive advantage there that you can have the conversation and, an honest conversation. Does this work? Do we need to adjust this and that? And I think this is
Yeah.
extremely valuable. I'd still love to go a little bit back on my question, saying, are there a couple of things for each of these three, let's say, key stakeholders people are getting wrong or they absolutely need to get right, other than, the risk, which is true for everyone? Are there things you see where, if you, obviously you mentioned before 150 companies being chosen. By the way, I would be curious, how many applications did you get?
So I don't think our application number is public yet for this year, but it's
Okay.
big.
Yeah,
We
can
did
imagine.
get 2,600 last year, 1,300 the first year, and we've got a lot more this year. So I can tell you that
Wow.
it's bigger.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe also from the screening process and all
Yeah.
of this involvement, you guys, you mentioned you invest really a lot of time and effort in this. What are the things people are not getting right, have to
Yeah.
get right
Yeah.
on startups, SMEs, but also on the investor side of things? I
Yeah.
think there are also, things they can get wrong, the
Yeah,
investors.
so I will say, I mean, the three things we look for, first is the technology. So the first step of the evaluation process is focused entirely on the technological solution. So is it novel? Is it feasible? Does it address the problem? Because we want to get the tech right, because if we don't do that, then none of the rest matters. Then we have a deeper dive where we two stages where we do a deeper dive where we look at three main factors. So again, the technology. So we have more evaluation of the tech. Second, the adoptability. So, from a defense standpoint, is this solution going to be meeting the capability need? Does it have a traction for the defense market, and so forth? And then the third piece, and I would say this is a big one to the question you're asking, is a really solid business case. So we don't need companies that already have revenue. We don't need, companies that have any investment, but we do need thoughtful, full articulation of that path to sustainability, because we are, and this again, we use dual use as a shorthand, but what we really mean is Diana only has so many companies it can support. We want to be supporting those suppliers that are going to be sustaining suppliers. So I will say that there is often the case that the business case piece is underdeveloped, and I think that, well, you got to this a little bit. I think it's founders or technologists maybe think that if they have great technology and that technology meets the need, that's the business case. But unfortunately, that's not enough. You need to articulate how you're going to be able to scale, where you're going to be able to find funding, things like your total addressable market, and how you can sustain the staff and the research you need to stay cutting edge. I just think there's many elements like that that are often one element of what's missing. And so we
Yeah.
do vet for that. And so I will say again, when we're talking about de-risking for investors, we are looking really seriously at the companies we're bringing in from all of these aspects. And so Diana companies should be easy targets for people to look closely at for investment.
Yeah. What you just described when it comes to, oh, we have this great technology and it can do this. I always like to call the engineer's problem, just because you have a technology which is
Right.
cool. And also this the wrong way around. They, oftentimes people develop technology and then they look for a problem to solve with this technology.
Yes.
And one thing I like to say for, technologists, engineers, is although you might not understand why, get a business guy as a co-founder,
Yeah.
because I oftentimes see genius engineers, maybe, they study together, they have cool technology, they have great minds, and they're genius with what they do, but they maybe, because of what they're so good in, they lack the focus on all of the, business side, finance, market entry, and so on and so on. So here, yet again, engineering teams, please look for a business guy in your team.
I think that that's absolutely right. And I will also say, though, what we want to make sure we're doing with Diana is maybe we're articulating a problem that you're so if you have great technology that you're not sure what problem you can solve, we want Diana to be a venue where we can articulate problems and maybe there is a match there. But even if there is, you need to your point, have a business case. The other thing I will say, and this is in the terms of the Diana application process with the consent of the applicants, we do share the non-selected applications. I mean, and there's so many of them with the relevant countries where they've applied is the way we kind of work it. And so we are working on ways and our stakeholders are as well about following up with those companies, at least on a national level, or those applicants, because it may be that there's awesome technology that really could solve a huge need. As I said earlier, it's just they're not really a great Diana candidate, but they may be able to be successful, to get revenue or to get value from that idea. It just may be through a government or through a prime or through a lab or a grant or some other kind of program.
Yeah, fantastic. So I think we have startups and maybe SMEs covered in who's interesting for you guys. Then who's interesting for you as an investor?
Yeah.
You build this group of trusted investors. What kind of investors are you looking for there?
So we are agnostic in terms of as a formal matter, the kind of investor. So we have sovereign pension funds and sovereign funds, as you might imagine, from within NATO, all the way to angels and family offices who are sometimes, I guess, and you've probably talked about this with your audience before, some of the best targets for the seed or pre-seed investment for what we're talking about, because those folks are often able to make decisions in terms of mission alignment.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we don't look in terms of type of investor, or we don't have a sort of criteria or cutoff. We do have a baseline set of security concerns and requirements because we are a NATO agency, and so we're building a network with a NATO focus. And so investors generally need to be they need to be controlled from within NATO, from the NATO alliance.
Yep.
We look at their funding. There is not a hard and fast, like all the money, every last euro does not need to be from NATO, but we do an evaluation of that. And then there is also a requirement to commit to a set of investment principles that relate to our values around, democracy and defense for the alliance and so forth. So that's basically the way we do that, and then we do due diligence on the investors. And this is really, as I said, as we're building our trusted network, we our innovators they're on the market. And so we don't, and they're under a contract with us, but we don't have um, we don't control, we don't own, we don't have an equity stake in those innovators. So another big piece of what we do is work with the innovators to think about the kinds of capital they should be targeting. And so what we want really is to make sure that the investment that they're getting, whether it's from our trusted network or from other investors that they've come across, is consistent with their ability to continue selling into the defense market. Because as you know, there's a lot of regulation and
Yep.
requirement around who companies are and who invests in them. So that's another big piece of our acceleration program, is training them around those requirements.
Fantastic. Thank you for that further detail
Yeah.
on the investors, because I always think, you know, well, what I see, unfortunately, because it's such a hot topic, what I like to call tourist investors.
Yeah.
Lots of VCs right now, they say, oh yeah, of course we invest in resilience now as well. But then when you speak with them, they didn't do their homework, they didn't understand the risk profiles of defense tech, nor are they really ready to deploy any capital. So it's just oftentimes, it's also a danger I see people, companies, startups being frustrated with. There's a lot of sunken time and investors which
But
aren't quite
this,
ready to
yes,
to execute.
this is exactly what the reason we want to build this community is because we want to have a venue, and we want it to be largely investor driven. So there's a lot of thinking. We have a chief commercial officer, Ryan Benitez, who's come on board, who's coming from a VC background and is very thoughtful about this. But what we want is a community where investors can come together and learn these issues. And to your point, we want those investors to be serious about this market, but again, to be serious together so that people aren't sticking their neck out. That
Yeah.
they can move together.
Fantastic approach. Okay, as we are starting to wrap up,
Yeah.
being aware of the time, I'd love to hear your thoughts, your take on the biggest opportunities, innovation opportunities, and innovation risks we have right now going forward.
Yeah. So look, it was very exciting to see coming out of the NATO summit a commitment on the part of all allies to really up spending to this 5% commitment, and 1.5% of that can be non-hard defense, I guess. There's a Again, I'm not a NATO spokesperson, so this, but
Yeah, yeah,
there's guidelines around basically spending on things like resilience, and deep tech research in addition to defense. So the big opportunity, and also the big risk, because that's been the word today, is that uplift in spend, because it is a real opportunity for new technologies to make it into the market, and for the what we all everything we've been talking about, for governments to be creative and and enterprising in how they're thinking about meeting their capability targets, and then that funding is there to do it. So it's not really a question about the funding anymore. The funding is going to be there. I think it is a question about how we balance using traditional capabilities to get to the defense needs versus innovative capabilities. And so that is the big opportunity. Um, and and I think I said this, but really the reason to be optimistic, and not just because programs like Diana exist, is that there's probably no other way to do it. Because, as we know, ramp up of production, exports, the current availability of the existing defense base is not really set up to deliver on the timelines we need, the
yeah,
capabilities we need. And so while we'll continue to rely on those, obviously, as you said, you're going to need to fill in more gaps with innovation. And so I think those will force some very exciting yeah, developments. And what I said to a room of some senior people at the end of the summit, there was a wrap up session. I was not at the summit. This was at an event next to the summit.
mhm,
Is that, and I think this aligns exactly what your podcast is all about, is there is a real opportunity if you're a founder in defense and security right now. And I think that it's 2025. I don't think that there's going to be another, I may be wrong, but another app on the App Store or SaaS platform that's going to make the VC returns that they were making 12 years ago. And so, but I do think that there are a number of new unicorns, and they're going to be European unicorns,
yeah.
that can come from this sector. And I think it starts with our stakeholders, which I think they're working on being more adaptable.
Yeah. Can I, or would you allow me to add to the biggest risk I see, just
Sure.
based on what you just said? I also, and obviously you mentioned it kind of, but I'd love to make it a little bit more tangible, maybe. I think a massive risk as well of this spending is that we don't mess up the distribution. And you mentioned that, and we know we make sure that not everything goes to defense primes / legacy tech, because obviously lobbyism is working, and we want to make sure that we get actually innovative solutions, and innovative solutions which are faster, cheaper, and better, rather than just more expensive legacy technology. And I think this is one of my biggest fears of all of this money, especially like in Germany, for example. Yeah, we've the biggest budget we've ever had. Now let's please, let's make sure that this always also reaches innovative solutions, which will help the future of the battlefield,
You
not
know,
just today.
Yeah, and I look, I what I will say is that, and what I am hopeful about is that there is a recognition, I think, also within a lot of the existing industrial base, let's say it that way, that their number one is a demand from the customers for innovation, and number two, that there's an absolute need for it. Because I think that even some of the big quote unquote legacy companies that you're talking about, when we're talking about the uplift of production that is being expected, um, there is not an ability to deliver at pace. And
Mhm.
so number one, I think that we can bring everyone along in the new reality. I think number two, and this is very encouraging to me, is there's a real recognition about the value, and particularly because of the, I guess if you call it software revolution, or finally the recognition that software enablement is what's going to give us a lot of advantage, is that you need open architectures. And so, I have hope that the era of closed systems is on its way out. And so that means that even as you need, obviously, as you said, big industrial partners to build big industrial platforms, there's going to be more room and opportunity for new suppliers to actually augment those and make them more powerful, and everyone wins. And the example I always use here is the iPhone.
Mhm.
I don't know if you probably were too cool, but when I was when I was in high school, you may be surprised to learn I had an old school Palm Pilot, because I thought that was cool. We'll leave that there. But the Palm Pilot, was old personal organizer, right, electronic thing, and it had address book and content, but it's a closed, dead platform. When you move to 10 years later, 15 years later, and you've got the open architecture of Android and iOS, you've got a baseline platform that Apple and the phone makers make a ton of money on, and Google. But then you've got a huge ecosystem that makes everyone successful, and that really increases the power and the durability and the reliance on the iPhone or the Android phone. And so I think that mindset is evolving, even for capabilities that you may not think are susceptible to that kind of open architecture. So I think that's another place where there's opportunity.
Yeah, fantastic. Tom, thank you so much. We've been talking about so many areas today, from, the vision and mission of Diana, to procurement, to investing into defense, and many, many other things. What I always like to do is, as a final opportunities for key takeaway, if our listeners of this 1.5 hour conversation take away only a handful of points, what are these points you would want them to walk away with?
I think the number one message, and obviously I'm going to plug Diana, but I'm going to plug Diana in a larger context. The number one message is that the decision makers and the stakeholders recognize what needs to be done, or at least that efforts need to be made to push for more innovation, and that you're seeing signals at the highest level, recognizing that and working to make change to do that. And so I really want people to be pushing on the system to make
Mhm.
those changes. And the worst thing would be for us to miss the opportunity that we do have, we just talked about, by having our smartest and most talented people, and I've said this is why I got into defense in some ways years and years ago, is you're making real stuff that is very important, that keeps people safe, that protects our way of life and our democracy. And we don't want our best and most talented people to go back, God bless them, but to go back to making, filters that turn your face into a dog, or another, optimized pizza delivery app. There was just so much talent. And look, I use a lot of those things. I'm not denigrating people who work in those fields, but there are
Yeah,
so many more problems that need to be solved now. And I think Uber has pretty much solved the getting a taxi problem. So stay working on these issues, look for the problems Diana's articulating, and don't take no for an answer. There you go.
fantastic conversation. Thank you so much, Tom. I really, really appreciate you
Thanks so
taking the
much for
time.
your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.